Welcome, late night listeners. Before we dive in, please remember to like, subscribe, and let me know your current location and the time right now in the comments. Your interaction helps ensure these spooky narratives find your feed. Now, let's begin this terrifying journey. I wasn't supposed to open the box. That much was obvious from the moment I saw it wedged behind the insulation in our garage wall, wrapped in duct tape, like someone meant for it to stay hidden forever. The only reason I even found it was because my dad asked me to clear space for a new water heater. If he'd known I was working that far back into the corner, he would have come out there himself. He never let anyone move things around in the garage, not even my mom. But he wasn't home. And curiosity has a way of convincing you that consequences only apply to other people. The box didn't look old. The tape was newer than the insulation. Someone had hidden it after the house was already finished. And when I cracked it open, expecting old taxpayers, or maybe things my dad didn't want my mom tossing, I found something much worse. Photographs. Dozens of them. All of my mom. A younger version of her standing beside a house I recognized only from stories. The first house they owned in Wisconsin. The one they sold years before I was born. But in every picture, she wasn't alone. She stood beside a man who wasn't my father. And in her arms was a child who looked so uncannily like my childhood photos that for a moment I couldn't breathe. My first instinct was denial. Everyone has cousins or distant relatives that resemble them. But the more I examined the photos, the more wrong everything felt. The man's hand rested at my mother's waist with the kind of familiarity that doesn't belong to a stranger or a friend. And the child, this boy, had the same scar under his right eye that my parents always swore came from a fall I took at age 2. Except the timestamp written on the back of the photo was 4 years before I was born. Same scar, same hair, same dimples, same smile, but not me. I flipped through the pile with shaking hands. The earlier photos showed a happy family, at least on the surface. Smiles, matching clothes, picnics. But as the pictures progressed, something dark crept in. My mother's expression changed. The smiles became forced. Her body language leaned away from the man. The boy grew older, and in one picture, he had a bruise along his jaw. In another, he was looking away from the camera entirely, like he was afraid of whoever was behind it. It didn't feel like a collection of memories. It felt like evidence. That's when I noticed something that made my skin go cold. The last photo was taken in a hospital room. My mother sat beside the boy's bed, her eyes red, face drained. The boy wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't bruised this time. He was asleep, pale, motionless. A hospital band circled his wrist, but the portion that should have had his name was torn off. And standing in the doorway behind them was the man, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes fixed directly on the camera, directly on the person taking the photograph. And whoever took this picture later sealed it inside a box they buried behind a wall. I shoved everything back into the box and closed it just as I heard the door from the kitchen creak open. My dad stepped into the garage, wiping grease off his hands, eyes scanning instantly toward the corner where I was kneeling. He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't ask what I'd found. He just said very calmly, "Put that back where you found it." Not angry, not surprised, prepared. I froze. "Dad, who is the kid?" He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the box. He only stared at the floor, like answering the question might trigger something he had spent years trying to avoid. "Some things," he said quietly, "are buried because they need to stay buried." I pushed again. "Was Mom married before you?" Silence. Then he walked over, took the box right out of my hands, and set it on a shelf far above where I could reach. "Don't go looking for things that don't belong to you," he said. There was something in his voice I had never heard before. Not fear, not anger, a kind of warning, a kind of finality that made my heart thud. When he left the garage, I didn't follow him. I just stood there trying to calm my breathing. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood what I saw. That the kid wasn't me. That the man wasn't someone important. That my mother wasn't quietly terrified in a hospital room with a boy who could have been my twin. That evening, my mom cooked dinner like nothing was wrong, but she was jumpy. She kept glancing at my dad, waiting for him to say something he never did. I thought she might bring it up, maybe ask why I was in the garage so long, but she avoided my eyes all night. Around 11 o'clock, I walked into the living room to grab a blanket. My mom was sitting on the couch alone, lights low, fingers gripping a mug, so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't hear me at first. When she finally looked up, her eyes were already watery. She didn't ask what I wanted. She didn't smile. She whispered, "Please tell me you didn't open the box." My throat tightened. I told her I had. She shut her eyes like she was bracing for impact. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "You weren't supposed to know." "Now what?" I asked. My mom stared at the wall like the truth was written there. "He wasn't missing," she whispered. "He wasn't taken. He didn't run away. It wasn't anything anyone ever assumed." She inhaled shakily. "He was ours, and we failed him." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Mom, who was he? Why did you hide him? Why do I look like him?" She didn't answer. She just whispered, "Your father won't let you keep asking questions. Not about this. Not about him." I stepped closer. "Why not?" Before she could answer, the garage door opened. My dad walked in with the box in his hands. He wasn't hiding it anymore. He set it on the dining table, calm, controlled, like he finally accepted that the secret wasn't staying buried. But the expression he wore wasn't resignation. It was resolve. He pulled out one of the photos, one where the boy wasn't smiling, and set it in front of me. "If you're going to know the story," he said, "then you're going to know all of it." My mother stood up sharply. "Tom, don't." But he cut her off. "He deserves the truth. And so does the boy we lost." My heartbeat hammered in my ears. Lost. Not given away. Not someone else's child. Not a cousin or a stranger. Lost. And the way my father said it, it didn't sound like grief. It sounded like confession. My father didn't sit. He didn't ease into the conversation. He stood over the table with the photo, facing me like it was evidence, and I was the one on trial. My mother stayed behind him, gripping her own hands like she didn't know whether to stop him or collapse. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like the house itself knew what was about to surface. "That boy," my father said quietly, "was named Aaron, your brother." The word hit like a punch. I blinked, waiting for him to correct himself, waiting for my mother to argue, waiting for some kind of sanity to slip back into the room. But none of that happened. They just stood there watching me process something I didn't even know I was allowed to feel. "I don't have a brother," I finally managed. "I never did." My mother closed her eyes. "You did," she whispered, "before we had you." My father took a step closer, so the overhead light caught his expression clearly. His eyes were tired, not soft, not grieving, just tired. "We never told you because we thought it was safer," he said. "For you. For us. After everything that happened." I stared at the photos again, my mother holding the baby, the man standing beside her, and the question clawed its way out of me. "Who's the guy in all the pictures?" My father's jaw tightened. "That's not the part that matters right now." But it did matter. Everything mattered. Everything they'd kept from me mattered. "It matters to me," I said. "Start at the beginning." My dad let out a breath through his nose, one of those controlled exhales he used to do when I pushed boundaries as a kid. Except this time, I wasn't pushing a boundary. I was unearthing a grave. He finally answered, "Your mother was married before me." The room spun a little. My mom sank into a chair, shaking her head, like she couldn't bear the memory coming back to her. "It was a bad marriage," she whispered. "I was young. He was older, controlling. The kind of man who made you feel stupid for wanting anything different." "His name was Daniel," my father continued. "And when Aaron was born, he became worse, jealous, paranoid. He didn't think your mother could handle being a parent. He didn't think anyone else should ever be alone with the boy. He didn't let her take him anywhere unless he approved. He monitored every hour of their day. He cut her off from her own family. Everything you'd call red flags now. Nobody used those words back then. Not in a small Wisconsin town." My mother wiped at her eyes. "I left him once. I tried. I took Aaron and stayed with a friend for 2 nights. But Daniel found us. He took Aaron back, told everyone I was unstable. And because he had money, the courts believed him. They gave him temporary custody while they sorted things out. A pit opened in my stomach. So, what happened to Aaron? My dad didn't sugarcoat a thing. One night, Daniel brought him into the emergency room with a concussion and 3 fractured ribs. He claimed Aaron fell down a flight of stairs. But the doctors didn't believe it. They saw old bruises. They called Child Protective Services. And for the first time, someone listened. Your mother got emergency custody. My mother looked up at me with the kind of expression that could break bone. He was safe with me, she said. He was finally safe. But the story didn't end there. My father continued. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who accepted losing something he believed belonged to him. He hired a private investigator. He followed your mother. He stalked their house. Sheriff's deputies saw his car more than once across the street. They told him to leave or risk arrest. Nothing stopped him. I felt my pulse in my throat. So what happened tonight in the hospital? My mother let out a sound. Half sob, half breath. He showed up. My father nodded. Daniel came into the hospital pretending to bring flowers for another patient. He waited until your mother stepped into the bathroom down the hall. A nurse saw him go into Aaron's room. She thought he was allowed. She heard him speaking softly, then louder, then yelling. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. I ran back, but I was too late. My dad's voice lowered. He tried to take Aaron out of the bed, pulled out the 4. The monitor started beeping. Nurses came running. Security dragged him out. The doctor stabilized Aaron, but the stress and the injuries and his body couldn't handle it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my father said the words that shattered whatever version of my childhood still felt safe. He died the next morning. My mother sobbed openly now, shaking like she had held it in for 25 years and was finally breaking under the weight. I couldn't keep him safe, she cried. I promised him I would, and I couldn't. My voice barely worked. And you hid everything? My dad nodded. We wanted him to rest, to stay in peace. We didn't want Daniel knowing where he was buried. We didn't want anything tied back to your mother. We changed states, changed our names, started over. I looked at the photos again. So why keep these? My mother answered with a voice so small it barely carried. Because erasing him felt worse than losing him. I was silent for a long time, trying to process, trying to breathe. Then I asked the question they clearly dreaded most. Why do we look alike? My mother froze. My father did too. My dad spoke first. Because you were born with the same scar, same eye shape, same hair, the same way he smiled. Your mother panicked when she first saw you. Not because you reminded her of him. Because she was terrified someone else would make the same connection, that the past would circle back. And Daniel, I asked quietly, what happened to him? My dad exchanged a look with my mother. A silent conversation passed between them. Fear, anger, memory. Then he told me. He never stopped looking. He called hospitals in 3 states. Showed up at houses he thought were connected to us. But eventually he disappeared. Some say he moved. Some say he was arrested on unrelated charges. Some say he just vanished. But we never found a record. And we never told you because we didn't want you growing up with that kind of shadow. I swallowed hard. And the box. Why hide it? My father finally looked me in the eyes. Really looked. Because last month someone broke into our garage and went through our storage. They didn't take anything, but they opened that wall panel. They were looking for something connected to that time. Something connected to him. A chill crawled up my spine. Who? My father's expression darkened in a way that made my blood run cold. We think Daniel is alive. And he knows where we are. My mother reached for my hand. Her palm was ice cold. And if he found out we had a second son who looks exactly like the first, my father finished the sentence for her. He won't believe you're not his. He will believe he has been robbed twice. I never planned to inherit my father's house, mostly because I never thought he'd die in it. He was the kind of man who seemed too stubborn for death, the kind who could outlive men half his age, simply through spite. But when the call came and the sheriff told me he'd passed quietly in his sleep, I had no choice but to return to the place I'd avoided for 14 years. The house smelled the same as it did when I left at 17. Old wood, gasoline, and the faint sourness of someone who lived alone too long. But the moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong, heavier, like the house had been holding its breath for years, waiting for me to walk back through the door. I tried not to overthink it. Grief does strange things. Memories creep back without permission. But the more I walked through the house, the more I felt the same tension I used to feel in my chest as a kid, whenever my dad walked behind me. He wasn't abusive in the traditional sense. Never hit me. Never yelled at me. Never threatened me. His violence was quieter, controlled. It lived in what he hid rather than what he showed. And nothing symbolized that more than the basement door at the end of the hallway. Even as a child, I knew not to go near it. My father didn't need rules. He had presence. A single glare from him stopped me from touching that handle my entire life. But on the day I returned to sort out his things, the door was unlocked. Not just unlocked, ajar like he'd walked through it moments before dying. For a long minute, I stared at the crack of darkness, wondering why the sight of an open door made my pulse jump. Something about it felt intentional, like a final message he wanted me to receive without speaking. I pushed the door open slowly, expecting old tools, dusty storage boxes, maybe some forgotten junk he'd piled up over the years. Instead, the basement felt like a different house entirely. Cold concrete, reinforced beams, fluorescent lights humming quietly overhead, and a single metal door on the far wall that had never existed in my memory. My father wasn't a handyman. He didn't build things. He didn't fix things. But he had built that room. The metal door had 3 latches on the outside. 3. Each one bolted into the frame, as if whoever was inside needed more than a lock to stay there. I felt my stomach clench, not because I believed anything supernatural lurked behind it, but because humans only build doors like that for other humans. After a deep breath that did nothing to calm me, I unlatched the first bolt, then the second. My hand hesitated at the third. For a moment, I thought about walking back upstairs and leaving the house forever. But curiosity and dread taste similar, and I've always been bad at telling the difference. I opened the last latch. The room inside wasn't large. It was just big enough to hold a cot, a metal table, and a drain in the center of the floor that told me exactly what this room was long before I found the notebooks. The smell threw me off first. Not rotten, not moldy, but something chemical like bleach layered over years of sweat and fear. The cot had straps on each corner, frayed from tension. Above it, the wall carried long scratches from fingernails dragged downward again and again. My breath shook as I got closer. There were numbers carved into the plaster, hundreds of them, counting days, maybe, or attempts. I found the notebook stacked on the metal table in perfect order, labeled year by year. My father's handwriting covered every page. Not diary entries, not musings, logs, observations, behavior tracking, sleep patterns, emotional reactions, resistance levels. Some entries were short, calm today, no attempts, while others stretched half a page describing episodes, outbursts, testing the restraints. My palms went cold because every line sounded like he was documenting an animal he was trying to domesticate. But this wasn't an animal. This was a person. Someone who lived down here. Someone my father restrained, studied, fed, and punished. Someone whose existence I never knew about. The first notebook didn't mention a name, just the pronoun he. The entries began before I was born. As I flipped forward through the years, the tone of the writing changed. Less clinical, more frustrated, then fearful. I read one line 3 times just to understand it. He remembers the boy. I didn't know what that meant, but whatever memory my father wrote about terrified him enough that the next 20 pages became frantic, shaky, almost illegible. He wrote about reinforcement. He wrote about repeat attempts. He wrote about a night the system almost failed. And then the entry stopped suddenly. The next notebook, dated the year I turned 6, began with a sentence that made my chest tighten. He cannot stay here now that the boy is older. The boy was me. I felt my vision pulse. My father had written dozens of pages, explaining why the person in the room couldn't stay in the house with me around. I didn't understand what connection my father thought existed between us, or why it mattered that I was getting older. But in the final entry of that notebook, He wrote a sentence that didn't feel like it belonged in a parent's handwriting. He will come for the boy if I release him. I stepped back from the table, shaking so hard the notebook slid to the floor. There was no paranormal twist here. No curse, no hallucination. This was simply a father who believed, truly believed, that someone he kept locked in his basement was a threat to me, or that I was a threat to him. I didn't know which possibility scared me more. I picked up the last notebook in the stack, the most recent one, dated only months before my father died. It was shorter than the others, as if he had stopped writing altogether. The first page described a final removal, whatever that meant, and the pages after that were blank. All except for the very last one. It contained a single sentence written in darker ink, pressed hard enough to indent the paper beneath it. Do not open the floor. I stared at the concrete beneath my shoes. Smooth, clean, unremarkable. But now that I knew to look closely, I saw the difference. The faint outline of a square panel, the thin seams around it, the metal rings bolted to its corners, a hidden hatch, a deeper room, a place my father didn't want anyone entering, a place he built for someone or for something he feared lived in our family. Either way, I wasn't prepared for what I'd find when I lifted that panel. I didn't open the hatch right away. I stood there staring at the seams until my knees felt weak, trying to convince myself that whatever lay beneath that panel didn't concern me. But the longer I stared, the more I realized the truth I'd been avoiding since the moment I entered the basement. My father had spent decades preparing for something he believed was inevitable, and he died before finishing whatever he started. That made the hatch my responsibility, whether I wanted it or not. I grabbed the metal ring closest to me, half expecting it to be rusted in place, but it lifted with frightening ease, like someone had opened it recently. The panel came up with a dull scrape, revealing a narrow drop into darkness, and a ladder bolted into the wall. The smell hit me first. Damp concrete mixed with old sweat, and something metallic, faintly lingering in the air. Not blood, not rot, just the stale scent of a space that had held people for far too long. I climbed down slowly, each rung colder than the last. The room at the bottom was barely tall enough to stand in. The ceiling pressed down, trapping the heat of old bodies and old fear. A thin mattress lay against one wall, worn down to the springs. On the opposite wall were more scratches, hundreds of them layered on top of one another until they formed deep grooves. Whoever had lived down here hadn't been calm. They had been desperate. My chest tightened as I imagined someone clawing the walls day after day, year after year. The back corner of the room held something I didn't notice at first. A small stack of folded clothes neatly arranged. Children's sizes mixed with adult sizes. Shirts, shorts, a jacket. Every piece was washed. Every piece was placed with care. I couldn't understand why my father would store clothes here unless he'd been preparing for someone to return, or unless he'd removed someone who never made it out alive. My pulse quickened as I turned to the far wall, where a thin pipe ran down from the ceiling into a metal basin. It wasn't a sink. It was a feeding station. The pipe was stained with rust and something darker in the grooves, as if thick liquid had dried there over time. I didn't want to imagine what. I nearly climbed back up without touching anything else, but curiosity forced one last look around. That's when I saw the drawings. Crudely made scratches that formed crude stick figures etched into the concrete. One figure was always larger, towering over the smaller one beside it. Some scenes showed the big figure holding the small one's hand. Others showed them separated by a line carved down the center of the wall. But one drawing stopped my breath cold. The smaller figure had an X carved across its chest, and beside it were words scratched deep enough to expose raw cement beneath. He took me. Not they, not it. He. I climbed out of the hatch faster than I intended, slamming the panel shut the moment my head cleared the floor. My hands were shaking. My breath felt jagged. I told myself I would leave the house right then, call the sheriff, let them deal with whatever this was. But before I reached the stairs, something on the table caught my eye. A single envelope addressed in my father's handwriting. Not my name, just the word "you." My stomach sank as I opened it. Inside was a letter short enough to fit on one page, but heavy enough to change everything I understood about my family. He wrote that the man he kept in the room wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't someone from the outside world. He was family. More specifically, he was my father's older brother. A man removed from the family history, erased long before I was born. My father claimed he'd been violent, unstable, dangerous from childhood. The family tried hospitals, therapy, everything they could, but none of it worked. Eventually, my grandfather built the first version of the room to contain him, convinced that letting him out would destroy the family. When my grandfather died, my father inherited the responsibility like some twisted form of tradition. That alone would have been horrifying. But the second paragraph made my hands go cold. My father wrote that there was a reason he never let me near the basement growing up. A reason he watched me so closely whenever I got angry. A reason he kept track of how I responded to stress, conflict, fear. He believed what ran in his brother also ran in him, and what ran in him could run in me. He wrote that he'd spent years trying to decide whether he should teach me the responsibility, whether he should prepare me for what he believed was a genetic curse passed down through the man in our bloodline. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't want to turn me into him. The final line of the letter wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was something far worse. I didn't build the room for him. He wrote, I built the room for whoever came next. I read that sentence again and again, trying to understand whether he meant me or someone I didn't know existed. But when I looked down at the drawings carved into the wall in the lower room, the child-sized clothes neatly folded, the large figure towering over the small one, it hit me with a clarity so sharp it hurt. My father hadn't been monitoring me because he feared I would hurt someone. He'd been monitoring me because he feared I was becoming the person he was locking away. I stepped back from the hatch, suddenly aware of every creak in the house. This wasn't a story about a man locking away a dangerous relative. This was a story about a family hiding a genetic, psychic inheritance of violence, guilt, and fear, handed down quietly, privately, generation by generation. The room wasn't built to restrain one man. It was built as a cage for the next host. And whether I liked it or not, my father believed I was next in line to inherit it. I left the house without taking anything except the letter. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next. I kept hearing the words, whoever came next, looping through my head. On the third night, just before dawn, someone knocked on my motel door. 3 slow taps, not neighborly, not impatient, familiar, the kind of knock my father used when he wanted me to open the door quietly. When I checked the peephole, no one was there. Just a parking lot, just empty pavement. But on the ground directly in front of my door was a folded piece of paper held down by a small stone. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were 5 words carved into the paper with something sharp. I am the one who knocks. I used to think my mother's life began and ended with us. Just the 3 of us inside that cramped Wisconsin townhouse, where birthdays felt small but safe, and where every photo in every album showed the same people, the same smiles, the same carefully curated version of our family. I thought her quietness was just personality. I thought her tired eyes came from working double shifts. I thought her insistence on keeping certain rooms locked, certain topics off limits, certain weekends for herself, was simply a woman trying to hold together a difficult life. I didn't realize those days off were not rest at all. They were visits. Visits to the family she'd had long before she ever married my father. A family she never stopped monitoring. A family she never truly abandoned. Even when she built a new life on top of the old one. Like pouring concrete over something she didn't want seen. It started with a lawyer's envelope 2 weeks after her funeral. I was the executive, the only child, the only heir. The will itself was painfully simple, except for one line that the lawyer paused over like she was bracing for my reaction. My mother wanted me to collect a box from a storage facility she'd rented under a different last name. The lawyer slid the storage key across the table with a quiet, uncomfortable hesitation that made my stomach not even before I held it. My mother wasn't careless. She wasn't the type to make mistakes. If she had a separate locker with a separate name, she had a reason, and that terrified me more than anything. The storage unit was small, barely large enough for a mattress and a few boxes. And yet, the moment I opened the door, I felt like I had stepped into the part of her life she spent decades trying to bury. Inside were 5 photo albums arranged in neat stacks, a shoe box filled with bracelets and tiny shoes, and hospital bracelets with children's names, and a binder full of receipts, appointment schedules, and school forms. None of them with my name on them. They belonged to 3 boys and 1 girl, ages ranging from newborn to 10, names I had never heard her speak. And each album was labeled with their birth years, years before mine. My mother had 4 children before me. For whole lives she parented long, before she ever brought me home from the hospital. For brothers and sisters I never knew existed. I sat in that cold concrete room, flipping through page after page, each photograph unspooling the version of my mother I never met. There she was at a playground holding a toddler I'd never seen. There she was at a kitchen table I didn't recognize, surrounded by children who looked nothing like me or my father. There she was blowing out candles on birthdays I never knew she celebrated. And there in a photo that made my knees go weak, she was sitting beside a man who wasn't my father, looking younger, happier, almost unrecognizable in the fullness of a life she left behind. It wasn't confusion that hit me. It was betrayal. It was disbelief. It was a rush of questions that made me dizzy. Where were they now? Why did she leave? Did they know about me? Did they hate her? Did they hate me? But buried beneath all of that was a darker question, one I didn't want to think but couldn't stop myself from facing. Why would a mother abandon 4 kids and start over? The answer wasn't in the albums. It was in the binder, a timeline, a pattern, a descent. The entries changed year by year. At first, it was normal. School events, dentist appointments, birthday parties. Then doctor visits turned into hospital visits. Hospital visits turned into police reports. And then there was a word repeated across multiple pages, scribbled in my mother's handwriting, but with a frantic slant I'd never seen in any grocery list or birthday card she'd written. Incidents. The oldest child, Daniel, was listed in nearly everyone. The notes weren't explicit. My mother wrote like she was terrified someone else would read it, but the pattern was unmistakable. Aggression, disappearances, neighbors complaining, social workers asking questions she refused to answer. And then one day, the record stopped. No more appointments, no more forms, no more childhood documented after age 10. Daniel's album ended abruptly. In its place was a newspaper clipping taped to the back cover with the dates circled in red. A house fire. For children involved. 3 survived. 3, not 4. My mother was listed as unreachable for comment. I remember sitting on the storage unit floor whispering the same sentence over and over like repeating it would make it make sense. My mother left 4 children behind. One of them died, and she just walked away. But the truth was even worse because 2 hours later, when I finally gathered the courage to contact the storage facility manager to ask when the last payment on the unit had been made, he told me something that froze my blood more than any photo in that locker. Your mother didn't make the last payments. He said a man did. Same person who rented it before she ever updated the paperwork. Kept it going for years. Paid it monthly on time. Every time I asked for the name, he read it slowly, carefully, as if he understood the weight of what he was saying. It wasn't my father's name. It wasn't the man in the photos. It was a name I recognized from the binder. Daniel, her firstborn. The child she lost. The one whose album ended at age 10. The one I thought was dead. He had kept her secret alive. He had kept the unit open. He had kept track of her life long after she'd erased him from it. And the manager said one last thing softly, apologetically, like he knew it would break something inside me. He still comes by sometimes every few months, just stands there looking at the door. Never goes in. Just watches it like he's waiting for someone. For the first time since my mother died, I felt truly unsafe. Not because Daniel existed, but because I was suddenly sure of something I hadn't dared consider. He knew about me. And unlike the others, unlike the 3 surviving children, he never appeared in any adult records. No forwarding addresses, no employment, no social media, nothing. It was as if he'd slipped into a life lived entirely off-grid. And worse, far worse, I realized my mother's fear wasn't about leaving her old life behind. It was about something from that life refusing to let her go. I closed the storage door, locked it, and walked back to my car, knowing one thing with absolute clarity. If Daniel had kept the past alive for this long, he was never going to let the present stay buried. And I was the only piece of my mother's new life he hadn't met yet. I didn't sleep the night after I left the storage unit. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn. The album spread across the surface like evidence in a case I wasn't qualified to solve. Every page, every scribbled note, every missing detail felt like a trap. One I'd already stepped into by opening that locker in the first place. I kept asking myself why my mother never said anything. Why she chose silence over honesty. Why she let me believe our family began with me when she had already lived an entire life before I was even born. But the question that kept me awake wasn't about her. It was about Daniel. What did he want now? By morning, exhaustion burned in my eyes, but my thoughts were sharper. I needed answers, and I didn't trust anyone except the one person who had something to lose by telling the truth. My father. He was the safe one in my childhood, the steady presence, the reason I believed our family was stable. And yet he had lived beside my mother for 30 years. Without ever speaking her past aloud. That meant something. That meant he was hiding something, too. When he opened the door, he didn't even say hello. He looked at me the way people look at someone who has found the one drawer they were never meant to open. There was resignation in his expression, not surprise. Before I could speak, he stepped aside and let me in like he'd been waiting for this conversation for years. We sat in the living room. No TV, no coffee, just silence thick enough to choke on. I know, I finally said, my voice raw. I know about the other children. He closed his eyes and pressed his fingertips to his forehead. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look old. It wasn't my place to tell you, he whispered. It wasn't hers to hide. He flinched at that. For a long time, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was so low I had to lean forward to hear him. Your mother didn't leave them. She ran from him. Him. Not the husband from the photos, not another lover, Daniel. I waited for my father to continue, but he struggled like pulling the truth out might tear something inside him. When your mother met that man, she didn't know what he was capable of. He was charming, attentive, but their firstborn was different, angry in ways no child should be, violent, unpredictable, and his father encouraged it, said the boy was learning strength. My stomach twisted. She tried to get help. He said doctors, social workers, anyone, but the family refused to acknowledge anything was wrong. Then came the fire. The newspaper clipping had said 4 children were involved. The binder said Daniel's records ended abruptly, but now I understood why. It wasn't an accident. I asked. My father shook his head. No, and he didn't die in that fire. He disappeared before anyone could question him. My mouth went dry. And your mother left that night. She took the other 3 kids and tried to run, but the family blocked her, threatened her. She managed to escape alone. Alone. Not with the kids. Not with help. She left 4 children behind because the alternative was death. She met me a year later, my father whispered. I thought she left her past behind. I thought it was over, but she never stopped looking over her shoulder. The room felt too small, too tight. I felt like I was breathing air someone else had already exhaled. He found her once before, my father said. When you were 7. My chest tightened. What do you mean he found her? He left notes, photos taken from outside your school, a message scratched into her car door. He paused. She begged me not to contact the police. She said involving them only made things worse. I sank back into the couch dizzy. And now? I asked. Now that she's gone? My father stared at me with hollow eyes. He has no reason to be subtle anymore. That sentence hollowed me out from the inside. I left my father's house with shaking hands. I didn't know where to go, so I drove aimlessly until I ended up in my mother's old neighborhood, sitting in my car across from the townhouse where I grew up. Every memory felt different now. Every birthday, every quiet Sunday morning. Every time she looked at the window like she was waiting for something to appear, she wasn't scared of her past. She was scared of him. I was still sitting there an hour later when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No name, no photo, just an image. My childhood home taken from the same angle I was sitting in now. Same street, same view, same moment. and beneath it a single message. I came back for what she forgot. My throat closed. My mother had spent her life running from the child she couldn't save. And now he wanted the only piece of her he had left. Me. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the will or the locked wing, or even the way my relatives refused to make eye contact when my grandfather's house was mentioned. It was the way they reacted when the lawyer said a single name. Eli. A name I had never once heard spoken in my entire life. A name that hit the room like a dropped plate. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. My uncle cleared his throat and stared at the floor. My father gripped the armrest so tightly I thought the wood might crack. And yet, nobody looked surprised. Nobody asked who. Nobody was confused. It was the silence of people who knew exactly what the name meant and hoped it would never resurface. The lawyer kept reading like she hadn't noticed the shift in the air. But I had, and my stomach understood something before my mind did. My family had a truth they'd buried so deep it never reached my generation. After the reading, everyone scattered like they'd been given permission to flee. But I stayed behind, staring at the old house, as if it might speak first. The property was massive, older than any of us, and shaped like it was designed to keep people inside, rather than welcome them. A 3-story farmhouse with a long left wing, the forbidden one, sealed off with a chain lock that looked far newer than the door it held shut. My father always said that wing had structural issues, but now I knew that was a lie. You don't chain a hallway for structural reasons. You chain it to keep something or someone from coming out. Inside, the house still smelled like my grandfather. Pipe tobacco, dust, old books, and a faint medicinal bitterness that clung to the wallpaper. I walked through rooms filled with photographs of every family member, generation after generation, smiling in stiff poses, but one face never appeared. Not once, not in baby photos, not in school pictures, not even in group portraits where you would expect a child to be. For siblings, 3 children in every photo, always the same missing piece. I waited until the last car left the driveway before approaching the locked wing. The chain wasn't even thick, just a simple hardware store solution wrapped through 2 brackets. I pushed on the door first, expecting resistance. Instead, it moved an inch, then 2, then rattled softly against something behind it. Someone had braced it shut from the other side at some point. Recently, the wood had fresh scrapes where something heavy had pressed against it. If the house had been empty for months, why was there new damage? I cut the chain with bolt cutters I found in the barn. The metal snapped faster than I expected, like someone had already weakened it. When I pushed the door open, the smell hit me first. Warm, humid air mixed with old sweat and something metallic. Not blood, more like rust. The hallway was narrow, darker than the rest of the house, as if the windows had been covered intentionally. I flicked a light switch. Nothing. Dead bulb or cut power. I couldn't tell, but the switch plate was polished, recently touched. I used my phone flashlight and moved in slowly. The first room on the right was a bedroom, except there was no bed, just a mattress on the floor, covered with a sheet that looked freshly washed. The corners were tucked the way hospitals do it, too neatly, too carefully. There were 2 bowls on the floor, one for water, one for food, both clean and recently used. This wasn't a guest room. It wasn't storage. It was a place someone lived. The next room was worse. Industrial restraints bolted into the floor. Sturdy leather cuffs still attached. A metal ring anchored into the wall, like something from a mental institution from the 60s. Except none of this equipment looked old. The leather wasn't cracked. The metal wasn't rusted. Someone maintained this room. Maintained it long after my grandfather's health declined. As I walked deeper into the wing, I noticed something else. Footprints in the dust. Not old ones. Fresh bare feet. The prints moved from room to room, circling the hallway, pacing back and forth like someone trapped in a cage too small for them. My pulse hammered as I reached the final door at the end of the corridor. This one wasn't locked. It wasn't even fully closed. Light leaked out from the crack underneath. Warm light, not the cold LED glow of a forgotten fixture. I pushed the door slowly and found myself in what looked like a study. Paper stacked neatly, books organized, an old radio humming quietly with static, a single cup on the desk, half filled with water, still warm to the touch. Someone had been here recently enough for the water to hold heat. My chest tightened as I scanned the desk. Medical charts, old report cards, ID photos, newspaper clippings. All of them belonged to the same person. Eli, my father's older brother, born 1971, declared unfit for mainstream schooling at age 10, declared a family-managed dependent by age 20. Last documented medical evaluation, 1992. No death certificate, no transfer records, no institutional file, just missing from public life for 32 years. There was one more document on the desk, a notebook with my grandfather's handwriting. I flipped to the last entry, dated 2 months ago. Eli asked again when he can go home. I told him home is here. He didn't understand. He never does. But he remembers voices now. He remembers the others. He listens at night. I hear him moving when the house sleeps. I fear he is beginning to understand the locks. My skin crawled. I turned toward the hallway and froze. The mattress was rumpled now. The cups I passed earlier were no longer where I'd seen them. The footprints in the dust multiplied, doubling their pattern. Someone had been walking while I was reading. Someone had left their room. Someone was now out of sight. I backed up toward the study door, heart pounding hard enough to echo in my ears. I didn't hear footsteps, breathing, or movement, but I could feel something shift in the air behind me. The subtle pressure of another presence in a hallway that had been locked for decades. My phone buzzed suddenly, vibrating in my hand, loud enough to make me jump. A text message from my father. Just 3 words. Get out now. Before I could react, something heavy slid across the floor deeper in the wing. Soft, steady, deliberate, not rushing, not startled, purposeful. I stepped backward toward the exit, flashlight trembling as I raised it toward the dark hallway. No one stood there, but the study door behind me slowly, quietly clicked shut on its own. And then I heard breathing right outside it. Slow, steady, patient. Not the breath of someone frightened. The breath of someone who had been waiting for company. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My back pressed against the study door while the sound of breathing filled the hallway. Slow, deliberate inhales and exhales. The rhythm of a grown man standing inches from where I'd just been. I tried to tell myself it was the house settling, that the old vents were making noises, that fear was twisting everything into something human. But no old farmhouse breathes like that. No empty hallway inhales like a living thing. I eased my fingers around the doorknob behind me, but the metal felt warm, like a hand had just been wrapped around it. The breathing grew quieter, not because it faded, but because whoever was making the sound had stepped farther back into the wing. Not fleeing, not hiding, just repositioning like an animal studying which direction its prey would run. My father's text repeated in my mind. Get out now. He knew something about this wing I didn't. Something that made urgency outweigh explanation. Something that made fear outweigh the truth. I took one step forward, then another, keeping my light aimed down the hall. Dust rose around my shoes with each step, except the footprints ahead of me didn't stir at all. They were crisp, defined, recently made. I forced myself to follow them because the only exit was the way I came in. The beam of my phone landed on the mattress again. This time, someone was sitting on it. I didn't scream. My body wouldn't even let me. I froze mid-step as the figure hunched on the mattress lifted his head just enough to show the shape of a face. Pale skin stretched too tightly over high cheekbones. Dark tangled hair hanging over eyes I couldn't see, but could feel staring straight through me. He didn't move at first, didn't lunge, didn't speak. He just sat there breathing slow. Deep breaths like the ones I had heard, like he had been practicing being quiet for a long time. The restraints on the floor beside him weren't dusty. They weren't untouched relics. They had been recently unclipped. My grandfather had kept Eli restrained. Someone had undone those restraints. And if my grandfather had been dead for months, it meant Eli freed himself. He shifted his weight, and I instinctively stepped back. Not fast enough for him to miss, but fast enough for him to tilt his head the way a dog does when it hears an unfamiliar sound. His fingers twitched like he was deciding whether to reach for me or test the space between us. He didn't look confused. He didn't look frightened. He looked curious, like I wasn't unexpected, like he recognized me. And that terrified me more than anything in that house. I backed down the hallway, not daring to break eye contact. Every time my shoes scuffed the floor, Eli's head moved just slightly, but always toward the noise. His awareness of me was too precise, too practiced, like someone who'd spent years navigating a dark world by sound alone. When I reached the doorway of the wing, the air shifted again. A floorboard creaked behind me. Not in the wing, but in the main part of the house. Another presence, another movement. My father stepped into view. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Shirt half-buttoned, hair disheveled, face pale. And when his eyes landed on me, standing at the threshold, everything in him collapsed. "You weren't supposed to open it," he whispered. "You weren't supposed to go in there." I wanted to ask him who Eli really was, why he'd been locked away, why no one ever spoke his name, but my father couldn't take his eyes off the darkness behind me. His chest rose and fell fast, but not from running, from dread. He finally met my gaze. "Listen to me," he said quietly, urgently. "He doesn't need to see you. He only needed to hear you. And now he knows." My voice barely worked. "Knows what?" My father swallowed hard. "He knows who's here. He knows the new voice." Behind me, the breathing changed. Not slow, not steady. A sudden sharp inhale, like realization, like recognition, like the sound someone makes when something long lost finally returns. My father moved toward me fast. "Come here right now. Close the door. Don't let him." His words cut off. Not because he stopped speaking, because the door behind me began to creak open wider. Not pushed by wind, not pulled by me, but open from inside. I didn't turn around. I ran to my father, and together we slammed the wing door shut. The impact shook the entire hallway, and for a moment, nothing else happened. No pounding, no shouting, no movement. Just silence pressing against the wood. Then something pressed back. Slow, methodical pressure, testing the door, studying its resistance, understanding it. My father dragged me toward the stairs. "We need to go. We need to leave the house now." "Who is he?" I demanded. "Why did you keep him here? Why didn't you say anything?" We were halfway down the steps when my father stopped abruptly, his grip tightening around my arm. "He wasn't supposed to be here anymore," he whispered. "When Dad died, I thought he had taken his place." A deafening crack echoed through the house. The wing door had splintered. We stared up the stairs as a shadow moved across the landing, slow and unhurried, not hiding, not running, just walking like someone exploring a house they believed was still theirs. My father pulled me toward the front door, fumbling with the lock as his breath shook. But before he could open it, the house made another sound. A second door closing. Somewhere upstairs, then another, then footsteps. Not heavy, not rushed, measured, familiar with the space. My father whispered almost to himself. "He's mapping the house. He's learning the new layout." I reached for the doorknob. "We have to go." But my father didn't open the door. He leaned his forehead against it, eyes squeezed shut. "We can't outrun him," he said. "Not if he's out now. He'll always find us. That's why Dad never let him leave. He never stops listening for the others." The footsteps above grew louder, moving from room to room, hunting through memories, searching. Then they stopped directly above us, right above the foyer, right above where we stood. My father finally turned the lock, but before he could pull the door open, 3 soft knocks came from the ceiling. Slow, spaced out, deliberate. He knows where we are. He knows we're listening. And then we heard the floorboard shift again, this time moving toward the staircase. Step by step, the rhythm calm, patient, unavoidable. Not the steps of someone chasing, the steps of someone coming for the only other sound left. I always thought grief came in waves, but after my mother died, it didn't feel like waves at all. It felt like someone had removed a wall I didn't know was holding my life together, and suddenly everything behind it collapsed. I spent weeks walking around my apartment like a ghost, eating without tasting, hearing without listening, sleeping without resting. People kept telling me grief softens with time, but that wasn't true for me. Mine hardened, thickened, took shape, and it wasn't until the attorney handed me an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with a strip of tape, browned with age, and addressed in my mother's handwriting, that I understood why. It said only one thing: "Not before I'm gone." The attorney had no explanation. She'd been instructed to give it to me immediately after the funeral, nothing more. When she slid it across the table, she did it gently, like she feared the envelope itself might shatter. And maybe she was right. Something inside me cracked the moment I recognized my mother's handwriting. The curl of the letters, the way she always pressed too hard on the downstrokes. There were tear stains on the paper, old ones dried into the fibers. She had cried while writing this. Whatever she put inside this envelope hurt her enough to bleed through the paper. I didn't open it right there. I wasn't ready. I carried it home like it was a living thing, like a small heartbeat thumping against my palm. I set it on my kitchen table where it sat for 3 days, untouched but impossible to ignore. My mother wasn't a secretive woman. She was private, yes, guarded, careful. But she didn't lie. She didn't hide things. Or at least I thought she didn't. By the time I finally sat down to open the envelope, the sun had slipped below the horizon. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator, a sound I suddenly became stupidly grateful for because I knew silence would break me. My hands shook so badly I had to steady them on my knees first. When I slit the envelope, a sharp smell of old paper and ink rose up. Inside was a single letter, 7 pages front and back. My mother had written until she ran out of space, not emotion. The first line didn't ease me in. It didn't cushion anything. It hit like a blunt instrument. "I have lied to you about your father." I stopped breathing for a second, just long enough for my vision to pinch at the edges. I had grown up believing my father was a placeholder, a name on a birth certificate, a man who left before I was old enough to remember. My mother never badmouthed him, never dramatized anything. She simply said he wasn't a part of our life, and that was that. The letter continued. "I didn't leave him because he didn't love you. I left him because he believed you were his to take. He believed he owned you, and I couldn't let that happen." I read that line 10 times, each time feeling something cold and foreign wrap around my spine. My mother wasn't a dramatic person. She didn't exaggerate. If she wrote this, she meant it literally. I turned the page with numb fingers. She described the beginning. How charming he'd been, how attentive, how safe she had felt in the beginning, how he changed after she became pregnant, how he began talking about the child as though it were an heir, a possession, something owed to him, how he had a history of controlling behavior she hadn't known about, how he was raised in a family where affection was ownership, not love. And then she described the night that changed everything. "You were 3 weeks old when he tried to take you." My hand clamped around the edge of the letter hard enough to bend the corner. I didn't know I was crying until I felt my jaw tremble. My mother's words blurred through tears. He had packed a bag. He had planned a route. He had waited for her to fall asleep. But she woke up when he lifted me from the crib. He didn't look angry, she wrote. He looked entitled, like he believed this was his right. She ran, not metaphorically, literally ran barefoot into the street with me in her arms, screaming for help until a neighbor opened their door. He didn't chase her. He didn't apologize. He didn't say her name. He just stood in the doorway of their apartment, holding the empty crib blanket, watching her like she was the one being unreasonable. The next day, she left town. No forwarding address, no notice, no goodbye. Every time we moved, she wrote, it wasn't for a better job or cheaper rent. It was because I felt him getting closer. I didn't remember moving that much, but as I read, the memories hit me. New schools, new apartments, new routines every year or two. I thought my mother was restless. I thought she was chasing opportunity. I never realized she was running for our lives. Page 5 broke me. He found us once that I felt the room tilt. She described a morning when I was 5 years old playing in the front yard of a duplex in Ohio. She'd gone inside to grab sunscreen. Less than a minute. When she came back out, I was standing on the sidewalk staring at a silver sedan creeping past the house. The man inside smiled at me. I smiled back. I didn't know him, but my mother did. She didn't confront him. She didn't scream. She grabbed me, went inside, locked the door, and we were packed and gone before sunset. I'm so sorry, she wrote. I wanted you to have a childhood. I just couldn't risk him taking you again. By page 7, My vision was swimming. The final paragraph wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was simple, honest, human. I don't know if he's alive. I don't know if he still wants you. But I do know this. You grew up safe. You grew up good. And that means I did my job, even if it cost me the life I dreamed of. The letter ended with 2 words that made my heart collapse in on itself. Forgive me. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried harder than I did at her funeral. Not because she lied, but because she had carried all of this alone. Every fear, every escape, every night spent listening for footsteps outside the window. I had thought she was cautious. I had never realized she was brave. And now the only person who could answer my questions was gone. But I wasn't done with her story yet. The envelope had contained more than just the letter. There was an address and a date, a place she wanted me to go, a place tied to my father, a place she hadn't dared visit while alive. I wiped my eyes, grabbed my keys, and told myself I would go in the morning. But I already knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. Not after learning that the man who wanted to take me might still be looking. I didn't wait until morning. I told myself I would. But grief and fear don't care about intentions. They hollow you out until the only thing left is momentum. And mine pulled me out the door before dawn. I drove in silence. The highways empty except for the occasional truck, drifting between lanes. My mother's letter sat on the passenger seat, pages still wrinkled from my tears. I kept glancing at it the way a child checks the back seat for monsters. Not because I feared the letter, but because it felt alive, like it could shift or whisper or offer something new if I stared hard enough. The address she left was 3 hours away, tucked in a small town that didn't show up clearly on GPS. I had to turn off the main road, travel down a strip of asphalt so old the paint markers were nearly erased, then follow a gravel path lined with pine trees, standing too close together. The sun was barely climbing the horizon when I saw the place. A weathered 2-story house with faded siding and a cracked porch rail. It didn't look threatening. It looked forgotten, a place time stepped over. But the moment I parked, every hair on my arms lifted. My mother had been afraid of this place. Afraid enough to write a letter she couldn't give me in person. Afraid enough to send me only after her death, as if she believed the danger couldn't follow her past the grave. I stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned like they resented the weight. A small metal box sat beside the door, old, rusted, but not locked. I opened it expecting keys or documents. Instead, there was a small stuffed rabbit, gray worn, stitched along the back where someone had repaired it by hand. I didn't recognize it, but the moment I touched it, a memory flashed, brief, blurry, like a dream barely recalled. A silver sedan. A man leaning out the window. A child, me, standing in the yard and a stuffed rabbit on the ground between us. My stomach tightened. He had tried to give it to me that day. I set the rabbit down, hands trembling, and pushed open the front door. The house wasn't abandoned. Dust clung to the corners, but the furniture was intact. A thin film on the tabletops, but footprints crossed the floor. Some old, some startlingly fresh. My mother had been here recently enough for her fear to still linger in the air like static. I moved slowly, each step a negotiation between curiosity and dread. In the living room, a framed newspaper article sat on a shelf. The headline gutted me. Local man dies in highway collision. Leaves no known family behind. The photo beside the article punched the air from my lungs. It was him. The man from the sedan. My biological father, dead for 9 years. I sank to my knees, chest collapsing around a breath that wouldn't come. All those years my mother spent running. She had already won. She didn't know. She carried the fear long after the threat was gone because no one told her the truth. No one told her she no longer had to run. She lived her entire life in a state of emergency without realizing the war had ended. I pressed my forehead to the edge of the sofa and let myself cry. Not for me, but for her. For all the birthdays she couldn't enjoy. For all the schools I transferred from. For all the nights she slept with her shoes by the door. She sacrificed every comfort to protect me from a ghost she didn't know had already disappeared. But when my tears finally ran dry, I noticed something. The obituary wasn't the only document in the frame. Behind it was a smaller paper, yellowed, fragile, handwritten. It was a receipt for a storage unit paid for monthly. Starting the year my mother left him, ending the year he died. My name was written in the notes section. Only my name. Shaking, I headed to the address printed at the bottom. The lights were off when I arrived, but the units were self-serve. The keypad accepted the old code printed on the slip. Unit 117 opened with a painful metal screech. Inside was nothing, no toys, no photos, no threats, no shrine, just a single folding chair and a pile of letters tied together with strings sitting on the seat. I sat on the cold ground and untied the bundle. Every letter was addressed to me. Not one was sent. Not one was opened. Some were apologies. Some were rants. Some were desperate pleas to know me. Some were simple, painful lines. I hope you're warm tonight. I hope she takes care of you. I'm sorry for everything I did. I'm trying to get better. In the last letter written 4 months before he died, the handwriting was shaky. I don't want to take you anymore. I just want to understand how I became someone you had to be protected from. I didn't forgive him. I didn't hate him. I didn't feel anything clean or simple. What I felt was human, raw, complex, heavy. He had been dangerous, yes, but he had also tried. Too late in all the wrong ways, but he tried. My mother hadn't known he changed. He hadn't known where we were. They lived in parallel terror, never realizing they were running from the same ghost, versions of each other that no longer existed. When I stepped outside the unit, the morning sun broke fully over the horizon. Warm light spilled across the gravel, bright enough to sting my eyes after hours in shadow. For the first time since my mother died, I felt something that wasn't grief relief. The danger was gone. The story was finished. The fear died with the man who created it. And the last line of my mother's letter, "Forgive me," finally made sense. There was nothing left to forgive. She saved me. She won. She carried a burden she never should have had to carry. And she carried it alone. But I wasn't alone now. I folded her letter and his letters together, tied them in the same string, and walked out into the bright morning, knowing one truth I could finally hold without shaking. My mother spent her life protecting me, and in the end, she succeeded. But just as I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. No contact photo. Just one line. He didn't write those last letters, did he? I first noticed him outside a grocery store on a Saturday afternoon. I wasn't paying attention until I realized he wasn't looking at the entrance or his phone. He was watching me specifically, not casually, not accidentally. He stood still with his hands in his jacket pockets, observing me like he was trying to confirm something. When I walked past him, he turned his head slightly, following my movement without speaking. It bothered me, but I convinced myself he was just another stranger with the staring problem. 2 days later, I saw him again outside my gym. Same man, same posture, same expression, like he was comparing me to a photo in his mind. He didn't walk toward me or pretend to be doing anything else. He just waited, watching until I drove away. That was the moment I understood he wasn't crossing paths with me by chance. The third encounter happened at night. I walked out of a hardware store carrying a few things for a home project, and he was leaning against a street lamp in the parking lot. He didn't smile, didn't hide, didn't pretend. He just watched me walk to my car like he'd been expecting me to appear at that exact moment. I got into my car quickly, and before I shut the door, he said, "You look older than I expected." The hairline is the only thing she kept right. His voice wasn't threatening, just certain. I drove home replaying that sentence. He didn't ask my name or question if I recognized him. He spoke like he already knew exactly who I was. The next morning, I decided that if I saw him one more time, I wouldn't ignore it. And a week later, outside my workplace, he made sure I did. He stood on the sidewalk, near the parking lot entrance waiting. I walked straight toward him and asked why he was following me. He didn't look surprised or defensive. He looked relieved. He reached into his jacket and took out a worn photograph. The paper was creased at the corners and faded from age. It showed a woman I had never seen before holding a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. He pointed at the baby and said, "That's you." I told him he was mistaken, but he shook his head like the mistake was mine. He told me my name had been changed. He told me my birthday wasn't real. He said I wouldn't remember the woman in the photo because I was taken before I could form memories. He said he'd been searching for me for 27 years. He didn't speak like a crazy person. He spoke like someone who'd been rehearsing the same explanation for decades. And the part that stayed with me wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it. Calm, controlled, certain. I didn't go home after that. I drove straight to a private DNA clinic 2 towns away. I didn't want drama, family conflict, or questions. I just wanted a scientific dismissal of everything he claimed. I paid for expedited testing. He submitted a sample. I submitted mine. They told me to expect results in 2 days. Those 2 days felt longer than any week of my life. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to start a panic over something that could turn out to be a misunderstanding. But deep down, something about the man's confidence felt too precise to ignore. When the clinic called, the technician sounded unsettled. She explained carefully that the tested man was not my biological father, but the DNA match was significant, not distant, close family, something like a half-uncle or a sibling to one of my biological parents. Enough to confirm a direct biological link, but not enough to categorize him as a parent. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I asked how confident they were. She said the probability was extremely high. I drove to my parents' house without calling first. My father opened the door, saw the papers in my hand, and his expression changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition. My mother hovered behind him, like she didn't want to step into the conversation. I asked who the man was. They didn't answer. I set the DNA report on the table and asked again. My father stared at it for a long time before finally sitting down. My mother didn't sit. She stood in the doorway like she was bracing for something heavy. My father said the man wasn't my father, but he was blood. He said they never expected him to find me. He said they had reasons for keeping certain things quiet. He didn't give names. He didn't explain the circumstances. He didn't describe the relationship. He only said we were keeping you safe. Safe from what? Safe from who? Safe from him. My mother added quietly. The family I was born into was not safe. They were waiting for you. That was all she said before going silent again. No context, no explanation. Just a statement delivered like a boundary she wasn't willing to cross. I left their house with more questions than answers. I tried to convince myself the man would give up or that the DNA test didn't mean what I thought it meant. But when I walked toward my car, I saw an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. I removed it and opened it immediately. The handwriting was neat, consistent, and practiced. You should have stayed with us. The key is in the timing. The word that mattered wasn't should. It wasn't stayed. It was us. He wasn't working alone. And whoever else was involved already knew where I lived, who raised me, and where I had been that day. This wasn't obsession. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't confusion. He wasn't trying to figure out whether I was the right person. He already knew. I didn't go home after finding the note. I drove around without direction, stopping only when I felt watched, even on empty roads. Every time headlights appeared behind me, I checked my mirrors until the car turned off somewhere else. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my parents. I didn't want to hear anyone tell me to stay calm when I knew someone already had access to my life in a way I couldn't stop. I finally reached my apartment near midnight. I parked farther away than usual and sat still with the engine off, waiting to see if anyone stepped out of the shadows. Nothing moved, no figures, no cars slowing down. I went inside quickly and locked the deadbolt twice. I checked every room once, then once more. Nothing looked different, but the air didn't feel normal. It felt like someone had spent time there earlier, long enough to disturb the silence, without leaving evidence. The first message came 10 minutes later. I didn't take anything. I used your shampoo.no name. No number saved, just a message. I blocked the number immediately, but another text came through from a different one. You kept your baby photos. I wasn't sure you would. The bin is slightly off-center. I walked straight to my hallway closet and pulled out the bin where my mother kept old albums. The box was slightly off-center. The lid wasn't on fully. Someone had opened it. Someone had touched the photos from my childhood. The ones my parents insisted were the very first pictures ever taken of me. I packed an overnight bag and left the apartment without turning off the lights. I didn't know where I was going, just somewhere that wasn't there. My phone buzzed while I was driving. Running again. I preferred the blue one, but the gray one is fine. The message had no punctuation, no emotion, just observation. He wasn't guessing. He knew I had left. He was close enough to see it. I drove to my parents' house because it was the only place that didn't feel like a dead end. Their cars were in the driveway. The porch light was on, but the front door was slightly open, and that detail alone nearly made me turn around. I went inside anyway. My father's phone was on the kitchen table, screen lit, with an unread message. You shouldn't have hidden the true path. The cabinets were open like someone had searched through them. 2 mugs sat on the counter. One had a faint fingerprint smudge at the rim. My parents weren't in the living room or the bedroom or anywhere else in the house. There was no sign of a struggle, just a house paused in the middle of whatever they had been doing before someone arrived. A knock sounded at the back door. Not frantic, not loud, just firm. I froze and waited. Another knock. Same rhythm. I didn't open it. I used the front door and left through the yard instead, climbing the fence and running until I reached the street. My phone buzzed again. A video. I opened it because I had to. The camera shook slightly like it was being held with one hand. It showed my mother sitting in a chair with her wrists tied. She looked terrified but unhurt. My father was beside her, hands also tied, eyes fixed on something off-screen. The camera turned slowly until the man appeared. The same one who had followed me. The same one with the photograph. He walked closer to my father and knelt beside him. You took him from us, he said quietly. Not to the camera, directly to my parents. He had a role to play. He stood and faced the camera fully. He still does. You know where to come. The video ended. An address appeared immediately after. A rural location. No houses nearby. No streetlights, no businesses. Just coordinates on a back road that barely showed up on maps. Another message followed. If you want them back, come alone. We've been expecting you. I could feel heat rising in my face. Not from anger, but from something worse. Clarity. My parents hadn't been hiding the truth to protect themselves. They'd been hiding me. They believed the man would take me again if he ever found me. And they weren't wrong. Everything he had done so far was methodical, patient, planned. He hadn't hurt them yet because they were leverage, not targets. I stood on the sidewalk outside my parents' house with the phone still in my hand, knowing exactly what the situation was. There were no police who could fix this without making it worse. No negotiation, no safe plan. The only path that stopped him from hurting them was the one he was forcing me to take. A final message arrived. Your life was a borrowed script. Now it's time for the true ending. There was nothing left to argue with, nothing left to uncover. My entire life had been built on a decision my parents made when I was too young to remember. And now the people they took me from had finally closed the distance. I got into my car and entered the address. Not because I trusted him, not because I wanted answers, because I understood exactly what he meant when he said us. And I knew that the only person he was never going to let walk away again was me. People tell stories about their parents as if they were born already knowing who they were. I didn't have that. All I ever had of my father was a framed obituary and a funeral photo of a closed casket surrounded by people I barely recognized. My mother always kept the picture near the television angled slightly, so the glare never hit his name. She said he died in a highway accident 2 months before I was born. She said it quietly like the details didn't matter, and I learned early not to push her about it. The story was simple, and it stayed that way for 22 years. The phone call came on a Tuesday night while I was microwaving dinner. Unknown number, no caller ID. I almost ignored it, but something, maybe boredom, maybe instinct, made me answer. A man said my name, not mispronounced, not hesitant. He said it like someone who had practiced saying it for a long time. I didn't respond. He didn't wait. I've been trying to reach you since you were born, but there were rules. His voice was steady, too steady for the words he chose. The tone wasn't excited or emotional. It was controlled, like he was following a script. I hung up immediately. For the next hour, I tried to convince myself it was a scam or a prank. But the more I thought about the voice, the harder it became to believe that. There was something tired in it, something familiar in a way I couldn't explain. I went to my room, took the obituary out of its frame, and looked at it more carefully than I ever had. The font looked slightly off. The date was printed in a different typeface than the name. The funeral photo had no priest, no flowers, no real signs of ceremony. Just a group of people standing stiff beside a casket that could have been empty. My mother never once told a story about him. Not one memory, not one anecdote, not one detail that proved she ever knew the man in the photo. At midnight, I drove to my aunt's house. She was the only relative who'd ever seemed uncomfortable when the subject of my father came up. When she opened the door, still half asleep, I showed her the obituary and asked if she had ever attended the funeral. She went pale so fast, she had to sit down. "I wasn't supposed to be there," she said quietly. "Nobody was. It was just for show." I asked her what that meant. She didn't answer the question directly. She just told me my mother would never tell the truth, because the truth wasn't something she was allowed to share. Not allowed. Allowed by who? I pressed her again, and she told me to leave. By morning, I had pulled every document I could find. Hospital records, insurance files, anything with my father's name. Half of them were missing pages. Half of the rest were photocopies of copies. It didn't feel like a man had died. It felt like a man had been erased. The second call came while I was still searching for answers. Same unknown number, different voice. This time it was a woman. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I knew who she was. She just spoke like she was continuing a conversation I didn't know I was part of. "He didn't disappear from you," she said calmly. "He disappeared for you. He was told to stay away." I didn't breathe, didn't speak, didn't move. She continued, "He did it to keep you alive. But things change. People get desperate, and he's coming back now." The call ended before I could say a word. I sat there listening to the dial tone, realizing the stranger wasn't warning me about someone dangerous coming into my life. She was warning me about someone returning to take something that was never mine to keep. I didn't sleep after the second call. I stayed at my desk with every document I owned spread across the surface, trying to rebuild a life I thought I understood. My mother's handwriting was on most of them. School registrations, medical forms, emergency contacts. But my father's name barely appeared anywhere. The few documents that did mention him looked like they'd been edited, replaced, or printed much later than they claimed to be. It felt like somebody had tried to leave just enough evidence to keep me from asking questions, but not enough to let me trace the truth. By morning, I drove to the county records office. If my father had really died, there should have been a death certificate. I filled out the request form, and the clerk typed his name into the system. She stared at the screen longer than she should have. Then she tried again, slower. "Are you sure about the spelling?" she asked. I repeated it. She checked again. Then she lowered her voice and said, "There's no record of his death in this county or any surrounding counties." I asked if a certificate could have been sealed or lost. She shook her head. "Even sealed records leave a trace. This one never existed." I walked out of the building feeling like the ground had shifted under me. The obituary was fake. The funeral was staged. The death certificate never filed. My entire origin story was a construction built by someone who didn't expect me to question it. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking lot. Another unknown number. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, then forced myself to listen. The message was only 4 seconds long. A single breath. Not panicked, not tired, controlled, like someone standing inches from the phone. There was no voice, but the silence felt like recognition that I drove to my mother's workplace next, even though I knew she wouldn't talk. When she saw me enter the lobby, the way her face drained made it obvious she already knew what was happening. I asked her directly, "Why did you lie about him?" She didn't deny anything. She didn't ask who told me what. She just told me to sit, then closed her office door. She said my father didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because he was drafted into it, because people made decisions on his behalf that weren't meant to be questioned. She said he didn't disappear to protect her. He disappeared to protect me. When I asked from what, she stopped talking. She didn't shut down out of fear. It was something else, like she didn't trust the walls around us. I asked her where he was now. She didn't answer. She only said, "If he's contacting you, then the situation has changed." I pressed harder, and she finally snapped. "Do not answer his calls. Do not meet him. Do not let him see your face. It will trigger something." The intensity in her voice made it clear she wasn't warning me about a dangerous man. She was warning me about something bigger than him, something structured, something organized. I asked about the woman who called me. My mother froze completely. Her eyes locked on mine, the way someone freezes when they recognize a danger they hoped would never return. "She talked to you?" I nodded. My mother stepped back slowly until her shoulders hit the filing cabinet. "You need to go," she said quietly. "Right now, before they finish the transition." She didn't say anything else. On my way home, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I didn't see any cars following me, but the feeling didn't leave. I stopped at a gas station outside town and bought a cheap prepaid phone that I didn't want to use my regular number anymore. When I turned it on, the screen lit up with a single text message before I'd saved a contact. "You're making this harder than it has to be. You're already where you're supposed to be." No introduction, no signature, just that. I drove again. Nowhere specific. I stopped at a rest area, went into the bathroom, and splashed water on my face. When I came out, a man in a gray jacket walked past me and entered the bathroom I just left. I didn't notice anything about him until he didn't come out. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Nobody exited. Curiosity overrode fear. I pushed the bathroom door open. Empty. It was a single entrance restroom. No back door, no window. He had been behind me the entire time, watching, waiting. And then he disappeared. I walked back to my car faster than I meant to. But before I could start the engine, another message came. This one to the prepaid phone. Not him. He is the anchor. I stared at the screen. The stranger in the restroom wasn't my father, which meant someone else was tracking me too. My real father wasn't working alone. My mother wasn't lying alone. And the woman who called me wasn't warning me alone. There were multiple sides to something I didn't understand yet. I drove to my apartment unwillingly. I didn't want to go anywhere familiar, but I didn't have another place to run to. When I opened my front door, the lights were off. The air felt cold in a way that didn't match the temperature outside. I stepped inside and checked the living room, the hallway, the kitchen. Everything looked untouched until I entered my bedroom. There was a photo on my bed. A printed photograph. It showed a hospital room, my mother lying in a bed, a nurse behind her, and a man standing near the doorway holding something wrapped in a blanket, a newborn. The man's face was blurry, as if someone erased only his features. But the posture, the height, the shape, everything matched the silhouette I'd seen outside the hardware store the night before the first call. On the back of the photo, a message was written in pen. "This is the moment she stole the new anchor." My hands were shaking, but I kept reading. Below the first line was another. "You weren't supposed to be raised by them. Your blueprint is different." And below that, "I'm close." I sat on the edge of my bed holding the photo like evidence in a case that hadn't been opened yet. There was no way out of this. Every step I took pulled me closer to people who had spent decades shaping my life without my permission. The last message of the night arrived as I held the photograph. A voicemail less than 3 seconds long. A woman's voice. The same one who called earlier. "We're all waiting for you. Come find him." No instructions, no location, no demand, just certainty. I turned the photo over again and noticed one final thing. Tucked into the bottom corner of the print was a tiny, faded address label for a building. Not in another state. Not another town. The same city, only 3 blocks away. A place I walked past every day. My father wasn't missing. He was being kept close, watching me grow up on schedule. The email came through my business inbox, the one only used for sponsorships and narration submissions for my channel, The Fearmonger. I assumed it was another story request or someone pitching a collab, but the subject line froze me mid-scroll. "We film together." I don't film with anyone. I don't collab. I narrate alone. Always have. Inside was a single childhood photo. I recognized myself immediately, 4 years old, standing in the driveway of the house my parents sold decades ago. My hair was messy, my shirt crooked, a plastic toy truck clutched in one hand. Pure nostalgia. Except the child standing beside me wasn't anyone I recognized. He was my age, my height, our shoulders touching naturally in a way only siblings stand together. He smiled with the comfort of belonging, but that bruise under his right eye, the faint, almost healed kind, didn't fit the smile. The file name made it worse. Your first co-narrator.jpg. I narrate horror. I don't narrate my own past. At least not the parts one remember. The sender didn't include text, no greeting, no explanation, just that picture. Grainy, sun-faded, but undeniably real. I printed it, drove straight to my parents' house, and walked in without knocking. My mother looked up from the sink and immediately went pale, not at seeing me, but at seeing the folded photo in my fist. My father stepped out from the hallway, and the moment he spotted the picture, he stopped moving completely. I laid it flat on the dining table. Who is he? Neither answered. Neither pretended not to know. My mother sat down slowly, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the chair. My father sank into the opposite seat, like someone had unplugged him. He looked at the picture with a mix of fear and exhaustion, the expression of a man who had been waiting years for this moment to come back. My voice felt tight in my chest. So he's real. My father nodded once. He was your brother. The word brother hit me harder than any horror script I'd ever written. Not a cousin, not a neighbor's kid, a brother I had no memory of, even though this picture looked like we'd grown up side by side. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. My mother whispered, because you became the fearmonger. Because you tell stories for millions of people. Because the truth wasn't ours to tamper with anymore. That answer made me colder than the lie. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table. He lived with us until he was 4. You were 4, too. You shared everything. A room, toys, space, every minute of the day. Then where did he go? My voice shook. My father stared at his hands. He was removed from our home. My stomach flipped. Removed by who? My mother closed her eyes. By people who believed they were protecting you. Protecting your mind from my own brother. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. What did he do? My father looked away. He struggled. Anger, violence. He kept trying to put things in your mouth when you slept. My mother squeezed her eyes shut. They separated you for safety. I tried to search for memories. A hospital visit, a hidden scar, a moment of fear. Nothing surfaced, just a fog, thick and impenetrable, like my brain had been wiped clean on purpose. I asked the question I was terrified to know the answer to. Where is he now? My mother swallowed. We don't know. We weren't given updates. We weren't allowed to contact him. The file was sealed, my father added quietly, but he contacted us years later when he turned 18. Cold crawled up my spine. What did he want? You, my mother whispered. Only you. He wanted you to remember. I forced myself to look at the photo again. That bruise wasn't random. It meant something. And as I stared at the boy beside me, I noticed faint pencil writing in the lower corner. Something someone had tried to erase. He took my memories. My breath left me. My parents watched me read it. Their silence confirmed everything. They had known this message. This resentment, this unresolved hatred might surface someday. We tried to move on, my father said. We changed states, changed jobs. We prayed he'd stop looking. My mother added, and then you built a channel, a horror channel, using your real voice, your real face, your real name. You built a stage for him. The realization hit me like a punch. A missing brother, angry, abandoned, unstable, had found me through my own work, through the fearmonger. My fame didn't expose me. My past did. My mother whispered. He watched your videos. He knew your mannerisms. He recognized things he used to see in you as a child. He recognized the stories you told were really his. Time for what? I asked. My father looked me dead in the eyes. For him to claim the voice you stole. My fingers trembled as I flipped the picture back over. That bruise suddenly looked less like an accident and more like a warning carved into memory. And for the first time since starting the Fearmonger, I realized some stories don't wait for you to tell them. Some stories come looking. I left my parents' house without saying goodbye. I didn't trust myself to speak. I didn't trust them to tell me the whole truth. And I didn't trust the shaking in my hands that refused to stop, no matter how tight I gripped the steering wheel. Every mile of the drive home felt like someone else was in the car with me. Someone breathing steady while mine came out sharp and uneven. I kept checking the back seat, even though I knew no one was there. But knowing didn't stop the fear. Not this time. When I got home, I did something I'd never done in the years of running the Fearmonger. I locked every door, every window, every latch. Then I slid the printed photo under a stack of papers on my desk. But even hidden, I could feel that boy's eyes on me. The brother, whose name I still didn't know because my parents refused to say it aloud. I opened my laptop to distract myself, maybe draft a script, maybe edit something. But the moment the screen lit up, my stomach dropped. A new file set on my desktop time-stamped 15 minutes earlier. Episode draft. He's not done. I hadn't opened my editing software. I hadn't turned on my mic. I hadn't narrated a single sentence. My hands shook as I clicked the file. Inside was a script fully written in my own narration style. Clean, structured, exactly like something I would upload. Except the story wasn't fiction. It was my life, my childhood. Descriptions of the old house I couldn't remember. Moments I had forgotten or never known at all. And in every scene, there were two boys, me and him. The script ended with a final line. He remembers everything, and the only way to finish the story is together. I slammed the laptop shut, so fast it rattled the desk. My chest tightened. My first thought was that my channel had been hacked. But who would hack me just to leave a perfectly formatted story? And who would know the exact layout of my childhood home? The placement of the tree swing, the chipped back step, unless it wasn't a hack. Unless it was someone who remembered being there. The room felt too small, too quiet. I grabbed my keys and paced toward the front door, desperate to be anywhere but inside that script. Before I could turn the knob, someone knocked. 3 light taps. Not loud, not aggressive, patient. I froze. No one knocks at my house unannounced. No fans know my address. I barely order food. The silence after the taps was worse than the knock itself. Like the person outside was listening, smiling, waiting to hear movement. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. When I pulled it out, my heart dropped even further. New email, no sender name, no subject, just a single sentence. I like the house. You keep it too clean. I checked the peephole. Nothing. No one. Just the empty street. Blades of grass unmoving in the still air. But someone had been there. Someone close enough to hear me inside. Someone who had stood on this porch before decades ago. Long before I ever knew it existed. I shut off all the lights. Sat on the floor with my back against the couch. Tried to breathe normally. Tried to think logically. But logic didn't help when the person hunting you shared your DNA. My parents said he hurt me once. They said he was dangerous. They said separating us saved my life. But if he blamed me for being the one who stayed, then he had decades of anger waiting to land on my doorstep. Hours passed. I didn't move. I barely blinked. At some point, exhaustion forced my eyes closed, and I woke up to sunlight creeping across the living room floor. I thought maybe the worst had passed, that maybe he had just wanted to scare me. Then I saw it. A folded piece of paper slipped under my front door. Not mailed, not delivered, left by hand. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was another photograph, older this time, nearly ripped in half. Me on a tricycle, him standing behind me, arms around my shoulders like he was teaching me how to balance. He wasn't smiling in this one. He was staring at the camera with an intensity one didn't understand as a child, but I understood it now. On the back of the photo, written in the same faint pencil from the first picture, "You were an echo of me." Underneath that, "I'm here to become the voice." My stomach churned. I grabbed my phone and finally did what I should have done. The moment this started, I called my parents. My father answered on the second ring, out of breath, like he'd been waiting with the phone in his hand. "He found you, didn't he?" he whispered. "He left a picture." I choked out. "He's been here. He's watching." My father didn't respond at first. When he finally did, his voice cracked in a way I had never heard. Listen to me. You need to leave right now. Get in your car and go somewhere public. Do not stay in that house. Do not wait for him to come inside. Why? I whispered. What aren't you telling me? My father exhaled shakily. Because the last time he tried to find you, the last time he got close, he wasn't trying to hurt you. He was trying to finish you. My blood ran cold. Finish me. He didn't answer. Dad, finish me? Silence again. Then my mother's voice came on the line, distant, shaking. We tried to save both of you, she cried. We tried, but he never stopped believing you were his, and people who feel robbed don't heal. They rebuild. There was noise behind them like someone entering their house. My father cursed under his breath. My mother gasped. Where are you? I shouted. My father whispered. He found us first. He needed us to remember the missing details. The phone dropped. A crash. My mother's scream. Then nothing. I stood frozen. Phone still pressed to my ear. My pulse thundering, so loud it drowned out everything else. I didn't know whether to run to them or run away or lock myself inside forever. Then my doorbell rang once. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't dare look, but I didn't have to. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. I forced myself to look at the screen. From unknown subject. I finally get to meet you. You have my voice. Inside was a single line. Open the door, little brother. Let's finish the script. And below it, a live photo attachment. My front porch captured seconds ago. Taken from inches away.